now that we do have the artwork drawn, so we can see we have some drawings occurring here. And we can adjust the timing. Again, we can keep changing which drawing is being exposed, pop over in the library, swap it out. So we can now create where we have this kind of thinking face going on, the screaming face. It's all good fun. But if I want this head to move around on screen, the way that we're going to do it is not to use the select tool. So we may be used to in other programs where I will then go and grab my artwork and move my artwork around. And we'll notice that the face was here, but now that one frame of the drawing, oh crap, it's not lined up. Oh, okay, well, let's go here. So I'll select this next one. I'll try and line that. Oh, I probably should turn on onion skinning. Oh, now that shows what's behind. Oh man. Yeah, we're getting really messed up here, and this isn't going to work. And anytime we move things with the black arrow, we have a very good likelihood of destroying any spatial relationship between pieces of artwork. So when we start thinking about working on characters, where characters have heads and arms and legs and hands and feet, so all of these different parts, and we construct them in relationship to each other, if we start moving things around with the black or white arrow, as we may be accustomed to in other programs, it's going to create a mess. And we're going to be really unhappy. So the goal here will be, I think I undid too much, but now all of my pieces are now lined up. We can see that they all line up on top of each other. Good to go. John, if onion skinning, don't want to see it. So we don't want to use these select tools to move. Select tools are just for selecting something so that we can then maybe recolor it, or I could resize it, or something. That's what select may be good for, but it's not good for animating. If we want to animate, a couple things need to happen here. Now we can keyframe the artwork itself. So we can switch to our animation tool, which the full animation tool is down here at the bottom, the transform tool, underneath the little yellow running man. But I'm going to direct your eyes to the top of your screen. The second row of buttons on the top, you will see that there's a translate tool, a rotate tool, a scale tool, and a skew tool. And there's a maintain size that we're not going to get into just yet. But these 4 items are the same ones available to you in the transform tool. The transform tool just does them all. So then that works out pretty well. So now I have a transform, I have a rotate, scale, and skew. And we'll be using those. But I'm going to recommend one other thing. If you read ahead and looked on D2L and saw what we were doing tonight, you would have saw that it involved tweening with pegs. So you may have thought to yourself, pegs? What are we talking about here? And what it is a peg is going to give us a transformation control handle. But the real power of the peg is that we can have one peg controlling multiple elements. So if we build a character for animation, every body part is going to get its own peg, and then we can have a single peg that now has all of the other pegs as children of it. So we move one master peg that will move an entire character. We can even attach a master peg to multiple characters. So I move one element and it will now move a bunch of things on screen very easily. Now if I take that same peg and scale it or rotate it or skew it or transform it, it now affects everything attached to it. So it's a much more powerful and ultimately significantly easier way to do your animation. So we're going to just first start out with a basic thing like this little head here. And the peg is something that is attached to a given layer. So I have my drawing layer here, the first one, the default that came up. And I'm even going to change its name. Call it head. And I am going to add a peg. So in my layer palette, you'll see there's a plus, and I did that again last week and now again today. And I can choose peg. Could add a new drawing, or I can choose peg. Now also there's 2 icon buttons in my layer palette. One is for adding a drawing layer, and right next to that is add a peg layer. Now when I add a peg layer, I need to select the head layer, and now it adds a layer, and you'll notice it takes on the name of the layer and puts a hyphen and puts a letter P, a capital P, indicating this is a peg layer. So peg layers don't have any artwork associated with them. All they will get are keyframes, and these keyframes will then show up based on whatever transformations that I am doing. So now, if I make my peg layer active, if I grab any one of my animation tools, the transform tool, the translate tool, rotate tool, scale tool, or skew tool, any one of these tools, we can see things happen. So what I am going to do is grab my, click on the first frame, and this is something that I find then sometimes helps, is we intentionally add a keyframe on the first frame of our peg layer by hitting F6 on the keyboard. And we'll notice that it put a little black dot there indicating there's a keyframe. Now if I move over in time and move this head, we'll see it put a black line indicating that is now a tween. Now if I drag the animation, you'll see the head is now moving across the screen. If I go over here and grab my scale tool, I can now scale the head up. If I hold down Shift, it stays proportional. Right here. Now I'm going to shrink it way down there for a moment so the head was here, shrinks down, scales up. And now I can grab a rotate tool. And we'll notice it's rotating around its registration point. Now the registration point for this peg layer, I need to set it where I want it to rotate. So if I want to rotate from the base of the head, I can do that so it's rotating from the chin. If I want to rotate from the middle of the head, I move that registration up and now it rotates from the middle. So you set the registration based on where you want it to transform from. Out of habit, I drew my artwork pretty much in the middle of the screen because I recognize by default the registration when you add a peg layer will be in the middle of your screen. So it now lined up. If when you go to your animation tool and you realize that that registration point is way off to one side because you drew your artwork to the left or to the right or to the bottom or the top of the screen, the best tool for moving your registration point is the rotation tool. So you move the rotation tool until it's at the point that you want it to transform from. Not just rotate, but transform from, whether it's scale or translate or move, because eventually we'll even be moving in 3D space. We'll move things both left and right, up and down, but also front and back. So we'll create an illusion of a three-dimensional environment. So now my translate tool is lined up in the middle, and now I can move my artwork around. Now if you want to only move horizontal or only move vertical, click on the arrow when you go to move it, and it locks it to that plane. If I just click outside, it moves it wherever I want. But if I click on that arrow, locks it to that. If you look at my timeline, you will notice that the black line and black dots indicating keyframes and tweening are only in my peg layer. They are not on my drawing layer. But if my drawing layer is inadvertently active and I grab the animation tools, I can now, hopefully, come on, move my artwork, and you will see that it now is adding, I kind of have a double tween going on because my artwork was moving with the main, wow, it's totally hosed now, because it was moving with the original tween and now I tween on my drawing layer. We don't want the tweening on the drawing layer. We want it on the peg layer because as your project grows in complexity, which it will, it's really critical that we maintain the animation on the drawing layer, or I mean on the peg layer only. So on this layer, I can go delete keyframes, gets rid of that. Right click there, delete keyframes. Okay, now I get rid of my keyframes. So now my animation's only on my peg layer. So if you see your drawing layer starting to get artwork on it or keyframes on it, stop, clean it up. Another tip that you can follow. So I'm going to just clear all the keyframes on my peg layer here real quick. So now my artwork is as if I haven't done anything. If you look in my timeline, I'm just going to pull my interface up so it's easier to see. Come on. So now we can see this at the bottom. If you look in my timeline, I can now collapse, click the arrow next to my peg layer, and now it hides that drawing layer. So now when I look, I don't see anything. I know that face is part of this head, but that also means now when I go to animate, I'm going to click on the rotation tool to make sure my registration point or pivot point, sorry, in Animate Pro it's called a pivot point, not a registration point. So I'm making sure my pivot point is where I want it to be. For this iteration, I'm going to move that pivot point to the chin. So I want it all to animate based on the chin. So now I'll just go grab the animation tool, the transform tool, and we'll start with it right here. Over time, let's see. It's right here. So at that point when he's yelling, I'm going to rotate it back a little bit and scale it up. Scale it back down now. Rotate a little bit. Scale up. So we can now add in movements and scales. Okay, I got a little glitch in the middle I think I need to fix there. Yeah, so somehow I shrunk him. Got big. Oh, when I scaled, it looks like I did a little flip, and it remembers that I did that, so we'll have to unwind that. Or I can clear that keyframe and try it again and work that out. But by hiding your drawing layer or layers, it now will only add the keyframes and tweens to the peg layer. One other way that you can help prevent that is with the animation tools. You can then say, I want to only be able to select peg layers. So in the tool properties, so in your tool properties, you can now specify, I want to only select pegs. Grab the transform tool, only select pegs. So we'll now notice all of these animation tools are now only selecting pegs instead of selecting artwork. So it's impossible. Another telltale sign is when you have a peg layer active, the artwork takes on a yellowish cast. When you have a drawing layer active and you're animating, it takes on a bluish purple cast. So if your artwork looks blue and purple, you know that it is not a peg layer. If it has a yellowish tinge to it, then you know it's a peg layer. Now, if your artwork is blue and artwork is purple, because you're doing something for the Minnesota Vikings, then you might be in trouble using that as a color cue. But otherwise, it can be a really useful way to keep that straight. Time to add in a neck and shoulders to this guy. So I'm going to add in a new drawing layer. And on this new drawing layer, and just shrink my workspace. Whoops, wrong key. Zooming in and out is 1 and 2 on the keyboard. I was trying to use plus and minus. Whoops, I was hitting the wrong ones. Plus and minus is exposure. Zoom in and out is the number 1 and the number 2. I wanted to zoom out so I could actually, no, I don't want green. Okay. Stay with black here. So I am going to add in neck and shoulders to this guy. Now, going to finish these layers because I intend to color him in, and by creating a closed shape, eventually I'll be able to fill it, so I can certainly go grab a color and fill when I get to that point. Not going to worry about filling my colors right now. We'll look at that a little bit later tonight. But now I've drawn this neck, and with that I'm going to extend the exposure here. And we'll look at the neck and go, wow, it's kind of wonked out and it's not lining up very well. But here's the cool part. This neck can be underneath head and attached to the peg of the head. So suddenly, it looks like I needed to draw it even a little bit longer. But that's okay, that's easy to fix. So we can extend this neck down. So I'll just break that right there. And extend the neck down further. Remember to switch my color back. All right, very ugly, but we'll see that it's now animating. It's picking up the same animation cues as the head. And if we wanted to animate it the same but a little bit differently, we can do that as well. And I'll name this now neck. It's really neck, body, and arms, but that's okay. And I also want to, no, don't want that to be a child of the, let's pull it up. I want the head on top, but, well, we'll fix that in a moment. We'll take a look at a way we can do that. But if I have the neck here, the neck can have its own peg. And then that peg can be a child of the other. So now I've added in a neck peg. And now this neck peg, as the body moves, let's go check its rotation. I want it to rotate by about here. So as the body rotates there, we'll rotate that over. So you can see it's rotating. Now at this point I want it back. I think I want to translate it over a little bit. Wrong. So it's a matter of just finessing it until you start to get some of the movement that you want. And tends to be a fairly, it's a significantly more intuitive way of working with some of this than we may have worked with in the past. We've created complex nested movements just by adding in an additional peg. So now we have these layers, and now if we just add in some coloring, we'll be able to make this look pretty slick. As you we talked in the beginning about when you're doing your project, it works better to leave it in outline. So you draw out the lines first and you build your animation. Then you go back and color and finalize your artwork so that you can kind of see, especially when you're trying to have subtleties or nuance between different frames. That's a useful way because onion skinning works when it's outlines. When it's solid, it doesn't work so well. So once you've done that, you can switch over to your paint bucket tool. And now with my paint bucket tool, I'm going to just click on the body here, and I can now choose a color. And if I look under my paint bucket tool, I'll notice there's an option where I can apply my fill to multiple drawings. But I can also apply my fill to multiple layers if those layers of drawings are visible. So we have an option to kind of fill down or fill across time. So right now I can just click here, fills the body. Now I'll go choose a new color. I'm going to choose the head. Now the head gets a little trickier because it moves around. So what it's going to try to do as I go to fill it is it's going to look for an area. So I'm trying to choose one spot on my screen where if I clicked, it would be the main part of the head the whole way through. And it looks to be if I choose somewhere right about here, I can fill it. Now if I scrub, we'll see, okay, it missed on that one. So it didn't get all of them, but we can click. So we can now, if we're lucky, it gets all of them, but it doesn't always manage to get them. So now we have now filled those areas. Now if I try to find an eyeball and wanted to fill the eyeballs, I could choose the eyeball, but it's not lining up because the areas aren't staying on top of each other, but because it keeps moving from frame to frame. If the enclosed space were in alignment, so I clicked and it could click all the way through, it would have drilled down and colored the eye in every single layer. So if the head wasn't scaling and wiggling side to side, one click and I could have colored all the eyeballs in one shot, which is kind of cool when that works. So I'm just going to leave the eye transparent for now. So that's just one more thing you can include in your workflow that will help line things up. That can be nice.